Huhi has been let go from the 100 Thieves roster heading into Season 9 Summer Split. And of course, that is because of his Spring Split performance, which no one is surprised by him letting go, from the main roster of 100 Thieves. And so, with that, I want to address some of the criticisms that he has received for this past split. Because, of course, when you look at his statistics, you can see that he has the lowest KDA of any starting mid laner. So that's a pretty telltale sign that he is on a downward trend. And if you look at his career holistically, he has been on a downward spiral for the most part. Now, going back in history, you can see that he didn't play with CLG even though he was signed with them in 2015 summer. And this was, of course, when Pobelter was the starting mid laner. And then Xmithy had problems going into Worlds because he had visa issues, given that he has a Philippines passport. And so he couldn't really play with the team. And so they had Huhi as the jungler with them for the boot camp. And then, of course, Redditors actually saved Xmithy fucking surprisingly, like Redditors helping out a pro player instead of flaming him. But Redditors helped him out in getting an expedited passport, or visa issues resolved. And so Xmithy was actually able to play at Worlds, but it was kind of too late at that moment because they had already been practicing with Huhi for the majority of the time during the boot camp as their starting jungler, right? So CLG kind of flopped at Worlds, and then Huhi's initial year, you can basically say, for CLG was during 2016 summer, and this was when they had the lineup of Darshan, Xmithy, and Stixxay and Aframu. But this was also during the time in which IMT had their crazy run with that good roster of Huhi and Rainover and Pobelter and Wild Turtle and Adrian, where they went 17-1, and that one loss being to CLG in the regular season. And this was, of course, with the game where Huhi was on Quinn, and then CLG were able to counteract that and kind of win out the game totally when Huhi was actually doing pretty good on Quinn throughout the season, right? This was like his little pocket pick. And so when you look at Huhi's play itself during that split, he was actually playing very well. His LeBlanc play was really stellar, which, you can't really say for Huhi's entire career, other than that his assassin play was stellar at any moment in time except this. And then, of course, his Twisted Fate was also a clutch little pocket pick that he was bringing out, and he was destroying and roaming around the map. And so CLG ended up finishing second in the split, and then they won against TSM in the finals, right? This was one of the rare times in which CLG actually won the NALCS. And then, of course, they went afterwards to MSI, and that's, of course, when CLG decided to run the Enchanters and the actual poke for the bot lane when it came to, support mage carries and whatnot. And they completely changed the landscape of MSI and, of course, with Aframu. And they did really well, and they got second after losing against SKT. And so you can see that Huhi's performance initially was very, very good. And I think that was mostly because it was an unorthodox and unknown playstyle of what Huhi would actually bring out, because no one actually knew about this player themselves. And when you look at CLG, even as stylistically when they were playing back in the day, of course, the focus was on Darshan being on split pushers for the most part. And then, of course, they transitioned over to Stixxay and Aframu being the focal point for CLG. And, of course, there were some standout performances from Huhi, as I said, on LeBlanc and whatnot. But for the most part, it was sectioned off towards the top in the bot lane. Now, Huhi, for the most part of his career, has been an enabler for the rest of the map, right? That's where you think his strengths are for the most part, which is also a reason why he's never looked like a standout player. Throughout his entire career, he's never looked like a player that could actually carry the entire game by himself. When you think of Huhi, you think of champions like Aurelion Sol, Rise, Orianna. I guess Orianna's in every mid lane's champion pool, so I guess that says a whole lot about how many fucking champions Huhi is good at. But champions that are good at making plays elsewhere across the map or setting up others for success in team fights. This is where Huhi shines as a player. So as you can see, there's never really been a spotlight onto Huhi as a player himself. And then you roll into 2017, and this is when, of course, CLG had Omar God and Dardoch as their junglers, kind of swapping in and out and whatnot, and it was kind of a tumultuous year for CLG as they were transitioning. But let's skip over to CLG at 2018. This was, of course, his last year with CLG, and he did not look so hot, right? But CLG as a whole didn't look great either, right? I mean, CLG, they tried to make Huhi the shot caller. At the beginning of the spring split, they even, released that video. It was literally titled CLG shot caller Huhi, right? Or CLG Huhi shot caller, whatever. And they had released this video at the beginning of the split, and then after 2 weeks, they suddenly shifted and put Biofrost as having part of the shot calling duties for the team. So as you can see, they just immediately were just like, nope, guess what? That didn't work out. Because Huhi's performance was slipping in the mid lane, and so they decided, well, maybe his micro will change if we kind of put more duties of the shot calling over to someone else, and of course, support being the natural role in which someone doesn't have micro intensive commands in which they need to do, and they can pay attention to the rest of the map. So they put that off on a Huhi, but it really didn't even work, and his micro didn't improve, right? And then this was, of course, when they had Reignover still, or when they got Reignover on the roster, and they had him get early leads, early on, which was great and everything. He was getting first bloods and whatnot, but the team had no clue how to play out the mid game whatsoever. So it's very clear that there was some macro specific thing that just wasn't really working out, and there wasn't really that great of mid jungle synergy at all either. So it was just this hodgepodge of there not being a real captain amongst the entire CLG squad. Then you fast forward to 2019, where Huhi is on 100 Thieves. Now, when you think of this 100 Thieves roster, you're thinking, okay, well, there's obviously previous synergy with Aphromoo on his time on CLG and so like Huhi and Aphromoo can bounce off ideas, and Huhi can funnel information over into Aphromoo, and then therefore they just have better synergy and a better game plan, and you don't fall into the pitfall of Huhi having to be a shot caller, right? Because Aphromoo is clearly capable of taking on that duties. Well, turns out Aphromoo just looked really bad the entire fucking split, and he was often mispositioning and getting caught out and things like that. And so you had two areas in which 100 Thieves were lacking within the mid lane, because mid lane was always losing in his matchup and he could never really go toe to toe with any of the other mid laners. And then of course you had the failing bot lane, which really wasn't at any fault of Bang. It was just more of a desync synergy with Aphromoo himself. And then of course when you go into the mid and late game, he didn't have any synergy with his entire team either. So when you look at Huhi's career, I want to say this. It's one thing to have a consistent player that won't win you the game at all, right? But he won't lose you the game either. Huhi is that type of player that won't win you the game, but he can certainly make you lose the game too. So he's doesn't even have necessarily a great positive, but he does have a negative. And so Huhi is never this kind of player that will ever help you carry the game. That's not something that you get Huhi on a roster for. So when looking at this 100 Thieves lineup, it's either the Someday Show or no one. And when you think of other carry role players, and I want to specify this as, carry role players as in, the mid lane or obviously ADC as being carry roles, but then role players within those roles, like a player such as Pobelter, of course, within the mid lane. He's not a super hardcore carry player, but he actually can carry some games, right? You just don't expect that. That's kind of a bonus. But he won't necessarily lose you games either, and it's very rare that that will actually ever happen, right? That's more on the international stage. And of course, you have Sneaky and Apollo in the bot lane. They are very consistent and very stable, and they necessarily won't win you a game, but they certainly aren't going to make you lose a game. So these are players that are never really going to get the spotlight, and that's the same with Huhi and his playstyle. He's always going to get shit on whenever he does bad, completely. And we saw that, of course, this split. But rarely ever get the chance to be that standout player because he plays this supportive playstyle. So it's harder to realize what he does to help a team. And it's a very nuanced idea of him being capable of actually dictating parts of the macro and how that helps the entire team. But of course, he can't really shot call for the team either, right? So he has this weird dichotomy to where he really isn't going to help you win. He is sometimes going to help you lose the game, but when he does help you win, it's not because he's going to hard carry. It's because he's just going to help put resources into everyone else, and then of course those players can carry the game. So initially, when you think of 100 Thieves, you think this team, it's going to be a top team. There were a lot of analysts that had put them in second place behind Team Liquid, of course, which is a super team, or at least in third place, right? That's where a lot of analysts preseason rankings were at. Given that Huhi gives a lot of roams and resources to top and bot lane, and so with Bang and Afromoo, you figure they're just going to carry the fuck out of this team along with Someday, but that didn't end up being the case because the bot lane shit the bed, of course, with Afromoo, and then there's no one else really to carry the weight except Someday. And then when you have this desynced mid laner and jungler, especially a jungler who is not really that great, then it's going to look really bad as the entire team, as your mid laner is losing pressure, and then of course the mid jungle 2v2, suddenly you're going to lose that out and then lose the entire map because of course mid jungle dictate the entire mid portion of the map, which is a large area of the map. So I don't even blame Anda that much when it comes to doing so badly within the spring split. Of course, he wasn't the greatest jungler, but it's pretty hard to do your job when your mid laner is losing pressure, and then of course you get invaded and so on and so forth. So I think with the future of Huhi and maybe him getting an academy spot, realistically I don't think he's worth a starting mid laner spot, even with him having the green card and having residency and him not taking up an import slot. I just don't really think he's that great of a player in order to put on your roster because of the faults that I said. So once Huhi shows that he can actually play the mid lane with a carry mindset specifically and show the potential to, hard carry a couple of matches in the academy split, I think he'll rightfully have a spot in the LCS without a doubt. Once he's able to actually, smash an academy and for sure he deserves an academy spot, but people that also think he will be able to, be a good captain aren't just smoking that fucking good shit, because obviously in CLG he wasn't capable of doing that even 2 weeks in. That was pretty obvious, right? But let Huhi at least teach newer players the basics of the game. Let him hard carry, or show that he can hard carry. And then, and only then, when he's shitting on people in academy, should he even be considered to be a starting mid laner in the LCS. So, with the criticism thrown to Huhi this split, I think it's pretty warranted. Of course, like, don't fucking DM the guy and flame the shit out of him or whatever. Like, that's pretty uncouth, and no one should ever really go to lengths because then you're just mentally deranged. But as far as the public forums and everything, yeah, it's completely acceptable that people expect better from this veteran player because he's been in the LCS for so long. And with new blood coming in, with franchise, and with teams having more money to spend on imports or even building up rookies because they can risk that, yeah, there's really no reason to have Huhi in your roster. So, yeah, put Huhi in the Academy League, see if he can carry the shit out of some games, and then hopefully he can transition that onto the LCS stage again and have more than the positives of what he had before, which was either go even in lane or lose lane. There was never really a hard carry idea from Huhi himself, and it's also harder to realize his positives when he gives resources to his other lanes, and if his other lanes are doing bad, well, there's no option for him to carry because he can't carry. So let him hard carry, let him see what he can do in Academy League, and hopefully he can bring himself back up and prove that once again he's able to bring that stellar performance that he had brought when he was first brought into the NALCS.